Good morning, everyone. This is Group 9, and our topic today is formal control and social control in domestic and international buyer supplier relationships. As we all know, international business has expanded. Now, firms have developed buyer suppliers relationship not just locally but internationally. A simple example could be Tim Hortons importing coffee from Colombia. There is definitely a buyer supplier relationship here. What this report does is analyze what affects buyer suppliers relationship. According to this report, there are two major controls that affect this relationship. The formal control, which includes laws, contracts, and regulations, and the social control. Personally, the social control could be seen as the informal control, and they're basically rules that guide relationship that are not really stated in given laws and contracts. Social control utilizes trust in encouraging desirable behavior, fulfillment of promises, and confidence in the other party. It is basically two parties trusting each other to get the job done. Before pushing on, let's understand more on social and formal control by understanding arguments made by previous studies, which answer these two questions. The first question being, what is the antecedent that leads to the adoption of formal control? That is, why do we need rules, laws, and regulation for buyer-suppliers relationship? The argument that was raised is the introduction of formal control to buyer-suppliers relationship was done to prevent transactional costs. What are transactional costs? Transactional costs can be seen as behavioral uncertainties or environmental uncertainties that occur during transactions. Now, remember the case study of NNPC and the British refinery that we did in class, and how each party could try to play smart with the other party. With proper formal control, behavioral uncertainties can be reduced. Now, the second question is, what is the relationship between formal and social control? Are they substitutes or complementary? Now, with respect to the second question, some authors argue that formal and social control mechanisms are substitutes. However, others suggest that formal and social control mechanisms are complementary in explaining the corporation performance. Now, they are conflicting views. But what our team argues is that with countries that have lesser legal structures, e.g., Nigeria, social control and formal control are complementary. While with those that have very good legal structures, these controls will act as substitutes. So it's social control or just formal control, and most times formal control takes the lead because they have strong legal structures. What this research does is analyze further the relationship between buyers and suppliers using China as the locus. A survey was done using data gathered from 380 domestic firms and 200 international firms to understand the relationship between buyers and suppliers both domestically and internationally, while answering the two previous questions that were answered in the previous slides. The next slides are going to help us understand what affects buyers and suppliers relationship more.
The first result we got is the influence of the length of cooperation on the use of social control mechanism is positive and significant in international cooperation, but insignificant in domestic cooperation. This is because cooperation experience supports the use of social control by facilitating the formation of trust. The long-term interactions between partners would be helpful to gain an in-depth understanding of each other. This understanding is a primary basis for trust development as it provides insights into the moral character of the partners. A lengthy period of cooperation also permits partners to share private information, decrease information asymmetries, and facilitate the development of trust. In China, cultivating trust is usually a time-consuming process. Chinese believe that one needs a relatively long time to know whether partners are trustworthy. In contrast, The insignificant result exists in domestic cooperation because Chinese firms prefer to initiate economic exchanges on the basis of mutual trust. If concrete trust is in place, subsequent cooperation experience may not alter the strength of trust and boost the use of social control significantly. Thus, it is trust first, cooperation second in China. In the US, both start at the same time. The correlation between the length of cooperation and the use of formal control is positive and significant in domestic cooperation, but insignificant in international cooperation. This result shows that social relations are necessary to support the use of contracts in cooperation. By using the length of cooperation as a proxy of social relations between partners, we found, on the one hand, in domestic buyer-supplier relationships, social relations do support the use of contractual mechanism. Traditionally, people believe that Chinese social institutions, which rely heavily on informal norms and obligations to govern exchanges, may impede the development and the use of formal contracts to govern economic exchange. But the result is contrary. This is because Chinese firms that are cooperating for the first time are more likely to use informal means to initiate business on a smaller scale. Since the stakes are lower, there's little need to develop a comprehensive and complex contract. Only after a long time has passed and social relations between partners are in place will formal contracts be used to govern larger scale exchange. Also, social relations, which take time to develop, are the necessary foundations for drafting effective formal contracts in Chinese domestic buyer and supplier relationships. On the other hand, in international cooperation, there's no significant relationship between the length of cooperation and the use of formal control. This is because Chinese firms may emphasize relationship-based approaches in domestic cooperation. They understand that this approach cannot substitute for formal control when dealing with foreign partners. Thus, Chinese and foreign firms may be more likely to develop a complete contract ex ante and use formal control at the period of cooperation. Institutionalization of cooperation is positively associated with the use of social and formal control mechanisms in both domestic and international buyer and supplier relationships. This is because institutionalization may boost the use of social control through cultivating interfirm trust. While develop relational norms, common values, and informal rules in buyer and supplier relationships may enable partners to develop complex contracts more effectively and efficiently. It is because, first, while developed relational norms, common values, and informal rules help minimize negotiation costs stemming from asset uncertainty by simplifying and smoothing the recurring negotiation process. Second, they endow partners with some degree of adaptability and flexibility to make adjustments to arrive at a mutually acceptable contract. Third, they allow partners to gain a better understanding of each other and thus to better predict partners' behaviors. Also, formal contracts can be perceived as an extension of institutionalized rules.
The next argument here is a social controls and formal control substitute or complement in domestic and international suppliers-buyers relationship. Let me explain this. Researchers who view these controls as substitutes see them acting separately without the need for another. What this means is they see it as if a relationship is being guided by social control, then there is no need for formal control, and vice versa. Social control could become necessary complement to adapt to the limits of formal controls. That is, when there is a limit or there's a limitation for contract rules and regulations, then social control comes in. This research argues that these controls are substitutes in domestic buyer-suppliers relationship and they are complements in international buyer-suppliers relationships. Social control has since governed the relationship between buyers and suppliers in China, and it is still prevalent. And this is because even though contracts are effective, they are being seen as extra costs in the current Chinese government. Also, even with the institution reforms, China's institutions are not as strong to take on social formal control true and true. Hence, social control is a substitute for formal control for domestic buyer relationship in China. However, the situation is different for international buyer suppliers relationship. And this is because the development of social relationship with China takes time and it's difficult. Hence, China and foreign firms have to combine social and informal control in therefore making it complementary. So, in explaining this, when there's a buyer supplier relationship with China, it starts with formal control, drawing up contracts and drawing up rules and regulations that guides their relationship. But as time goes on, there is trust, there is mutual understanding between the buyer and suppliers internationally. Hence, social control takes place, making it complementary thing.
In this slide, we'll talk about the international trade taking place in Canada. Canada is a founding member of the World Trade Organization. In the recent years, Canada has aggressively negotiated and concluded numerous new trade agreements that would build upon and have gone beyond the North American Free Trade Agreement model, also called NAFTA. Canada has currently trade agreements with 16 countries or regions, and it is in the process of actively negotiating six additional agreements and is exploring at least four new agreements. Despite the global impact of COVID-19 pandemic, recognizing the key role that the international trade plays in Canada's economy, Canada worked to keep its border open for trade. While economic integration provides enhanced opportunities, it also emphasizes the need to comply with the legal framework for trade and customs within Canada, including rules relating to importation, the use of trade agreements, export controls, sanction regimes, and anti-dumping rules. All these are listed in the slide. Strategic use of free trade and investment agreement also highlights the necessity to understand the resource available when disputes arise. Buyers in developed countries often spend a lot of money per year to ensure social compliance of their buyers and suppliers, yet the social performance of the suppliers in developing countries remain poor. Global sourcing from developing countries is on the rise. This has been accompanied by concerns regarding poor social compliance of suppliers and buyers. Buyers in developed countries, on the other hand, are often criticized for moving their operations to developing countries in order to take advantage of their cheap labor, the weak environment, and the social regulations, because they are much more easy to comply with. In the past, several incidents of suppliers' non-compliance brought buyers criticism for failing to manage the social obligations of their suppliers. Consequently, international buyers are increasingly avoiding engaging with non-compliant suppliers as it can adversely affect their reputation in their home countries. Some of the examples are listed below, like Nike, Apple, Walmart have been criticized in their past for failing to manage the social compliance of their suppliers in developing countries. Suppliers address buyers' requirement through social standards or by implementing a code of conduct developed and required by the buyer. Private standards are developed by individual buyers who administer them to their suppliers. These include codes of conduct developed by individual firms which were listed below before, like Walmart, Nike, Adidas, H&M, and IKEA. However, incidents of non-compliance are widely reported and continue to regularly emerge, indicating gaps in our understanding of the dynamics of standard adoption. There is also scarcity of literature exploring the conditions leading to adoption of public and private standards. For example, the main question remains on how both buyers and suppliers choose the type of social standards appropriate to their needs. Moreover, the factors influencing the decision-making process are poorly understood. Indeed, our understanding of the dynamics of the standards adoption process is limited and is in the need of further development in order to improve supplier social compliance. It has been indicated that collaborative relationship improves organizational performance. Over the past years, problems related to justice are reported between Walmart Canada and Lego Group, which might negatively affect the buyer-supplier relationship. It also reveals that collaborative buyer-supplier relationship positively influence supplier social sustainability. It is relatively stronger from the supplier's perspective when compared with the buyer's perspective. Secondly, the moderating effect of perceptions of organizational justice on the relationship between collaborative buyer-supplier relations and supplier social sustainability is also statistically very significant. However, it is relatively stronger from the buyer's perspective when compared with the supplier's perspective. The company that we are going to talk about is Walmart, which supports local businesses all over Canada, ranging from big stores to a single shop. It also serves multiple Canadians by providing them groceries at reasonable prices all in all the provinces in Canada. The other business partners are IM Gadgets, DB Organics, etc. When Walmart began empowering their suppliers with full access to their point of sale, some people said that the balance of power would change, but from the early days, developing partnership with suppliers would result in a win for both the parties. The scorecard has to be seen as a facilitator to bring suppliers and Walmart closer. The relationship between Walmart and suppliers does not have much wiggle room. Because of the transparency, buyers can never surprise suppliers about performances. Whether it is good, bad, mediocre, everyone is on the same page. Every few weeks, Walmart offers 3-hour webinar training course teaching suppliers how to use capabilities of the scorecard, how to interpret the numbers, and the key factors that impact the results. While many retailers are not quite up to Walmart's speed, fortunately, the days of advertiser relationship between suppliers and retailers are gone, but it is up to the suppliers to play the game, bearing in mind that it usually the retailer's ball. The suppliers of Walmart include some of the largest and most well-known companies in the world, as well as small companies as they support Canadian companies to a single store. They span from a wide range of products that they buy and sell. The suppliers are often leaders in their respective fields and operate in their own robust ethics and compliance program. A signed supplier agreement, acceptance of the purchase order, and provision of merchandise to Walmart constitutes acceptance of these standards and serves as the supplier's continuing affirmation of compliance. In addition, Walmart may enter into contracts with certain other parties that require those parties to comply with these standards. Suppliers are responsible for compliance with these standards, including responsibility for the conduct of any supplier, subcontractors, and agents they will use the part of their Walmart business, including factories, processing facilities, and raw materials. Anyone who violates the standards may be subject to consequences, including termination of business with Walmart. Walmart reserves the right to audit or inspect suppliers at any time to determine whether they are complying with these standards. Complying with the law and Walmart policy. Walmart believes in doing the right thing and is committed to complying with the law, and they expect the buyers and the suppliers to do the same. Conduct your business ethically and with integrity, which means not doing anything that would involve the risk of violating the law and might harm the reputation of Walmart or could be perceived as misleading or defrauding. Understand and comply with all relevant laws. Even if conduct is legal in the location in which it takes place, it is prohibited if it would create a legal violation in the country into which products are transported or sold. Complying with all applicable Walmart contracts and policies, it requires Walmart make requirements and resources available from time to time, including its suppliers compliance portal. Walmart's policy requires more than the law. You must follow Walmart's requirement. Obtain licenses and permits necessary to operate and to provide products to Walmart. Maintain these and comply with all conditions of issues. The next Canadian company that we are going to talk about is Tim Hortons. In this, we are going to talk about BPSCC, which stands for Business Partner and Supplier Code of Conduct. Tim Hortons believe that the principle of respect and fairness extend to the relationship with their business partners and suppliers. As a result, compliance with business partners and the supplier code of conduct is expected of all our business partners and suppliers. Business partners and suppliers are expected to comply with all applicable local and national law and regulations of the jurisdiction in which the suppliers are doing business. Where industry standards are more rigorous than legal requirements, business partners and suppliers are expected to comply with high standards. Business partners and suppliers should maintain appropriate records to demonstrate their compliance and adherence to the BPSCC and must provide such records or access to such records as Tim Hortons may reasonably request to verify their compliance.
The major question our group sought to answer is: are social control and informal control substitutes or complements in Canada? After much research and argument, we came to a conclusion that in Canada these controls are complements. Now, while Canada has strong institutions that guides the use of rules and regulation and code of conduct that fosters buyer-suppliers relationship, this does not void the social control of mutual trust and understanding between the buyers and suppliers. It is important to know that the specification of contracts safeguards and promotes expectations that the other party will behave cooperatively, and thus this complements the limits of social controls. Conclusively, contracts prevent opportunistic behavior, while social control fosters trust and understanding between suppliers and buyers. Now, these controls can be perfect as substitutes or complements depending on the kind of institutions in the country in which these firms operate. While some scholars believe that contracts can reduce relational governance, which can damage exchange performance, and some believe that without formal control, opportunistic behaviors are inevitable, we conclude that the control that guides a buyer-supplier's relationship should be based on the kind of institution in which these businesses are being operated. Thank you very much.